Welcome to the Pastured Pig Podcast, where we share the successes and challenges of raising pigs on pasture. We talk to producers all over the country, from small homesteads to large commercial pasture operations. Whether you're new to pastured pigs or have been raising hogs for decades, we hope you hear new ideas and new perspectives on pasturing hogs. Here's your host, Troy McClung.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Pastured Pig Podcast. You may be wondering, who is this guy and where has he been? Yes, I can't apologize enough how long it's been since our last episode. I was looking back and it's been almost a month and a half. And man, I tell you, time goes by. You hear that all the time. All of us podcasters, we all use that same excuse. Time just got away. But actually, what had transpired is I had two business trips that delayed some things. Then there was a vacation sandwiched in there. And unfortunately, the Rona came back through our house again. Fortunately, it wasn't as bad as what we had last time, but obviously that put us down for a bit, several weeks there. And what was interesting is it really attacked my voice. So I was froggy for quite a bit there. And I could possibly get about 4 words out before going into a coughing fit. So if you guys watch the channel, you may have even noticed there were some of the stuff was pre-recorded before then, fortunately, but there were some bumpers that we put in on some of the videos where, I definitely had a much froggier voice. But all's healed up, all's good to go, so hopefully getting back into the groove here. Maybe we'll just call that a summer break if we can. So quick, I wanted to get in some updates before we get into our interview. Our interview is a little long, but it's really good. And I've been sitting on this one for a while, and I apologize to Tanner for taking so long. But it's one of those, I really wanted to make sure I had my ducks in a row before we put it out there, because it's drilling down like some of you guys have asked, where we're really getting into some specifics and some how-tos there. But real quick with updates, I realized I didn't get a chance, or I didn't take the opportunity to kind of give a post-mortem on the pastured pig workshop that I was a part of down at Sheridan Park Farms earlier this year. And man, that was a great trip. It was a great time. They really put us up well, had nice accommodations for us. There was absolutely no way in the world you could go hungry down on Chuck and Sandra's farm, because they had that covered big time. So they fed us well. We had about, I think just a cat's whisker under 50 people show up to take the classes that were there. I taught just a series on marketing, how to market your farm products and those type of things. And it was cool. He did that in a round robin process. So we were able to rotate through, or the people actually able to rotate through. So I presented 3 times the same message to smaller groups. So it really gave a lot of opportunity for Q&A and some one-on-one discussions there. So went really well. And man, I'm anxious. I'm hoping they're going to do that again next year. And I'm hoping that if I didn't totally screw it up, then they would invite me for that again, because I enjoyed that. It's good company as well. Along the lines of moving on and things happening here in the near future, we will be lining up some more interviews. Those of you, the guys that have reached out that I haven't responded to yet, again, waiting to make sure I could put a date down that would make sense and not have to cancel. So we're ready to do that again. So if you would like to be on the podcast, obviously reach out to me and we'll get that lined up. And along the same lines, I need a guinea pig. And it could just be a 5-minute, 10-minute test. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. But if you follow the podcast, if you've been on the podcast for a while, you know that most of the time I'm off farm doing these recordings just because to do the interviews, I don't have good phone service here. I don't have any cell service. And our internet has been satellite forever, and the latency's so bad, it's just tough to do anything over the internet. Well, now we have Starlink, and so far it has really proven to be a vast improvement to what we've had. But I have yet to test a recording through Zoom of an interview. Just curious to see what the latency is going to be, if there's any dropout, how that goes. So that's why I need a guinea pig, because I hate to just take somebody who's taken their hard-earned time out to do an interview with me and it drop out and be something that we can't keep necessarily. So if one of you all listening, you want to be that guinea pig, you have good internet, and that's the other thing I'd like to do is make sure that you've got good internet at home. or wherever you're going to be, so I can really determine whether or not it's my internet's the issue. If both of us have lousy internet, then we don't know who's dropping who, type of thing. But if you'd like to be a guinea pig, just go to the website, thepasturedpig.com or redtoolhouse.com. Use that contact form, reach out to me, or just email me, troy@redtoolhouse.com, and say, hey, yeah, I can burn about 10 minutes in the evening, one evening, and just sit down with you at a Zoom connection, and we can see how it goes, because I want to test just doing audio and also testing video and audio to see how that works. Okay, well, let's get into our discussion. So who we're talking to this time, and again, I apologize to Tanner because it has actually been a while. We did this recording earlier in the spring, but we're just now airing it. But Tanner Spurlock is with Fuller Farms in Texas, and man, he has got a lot going on. He's got a 50-acre regenerative farm in East Texas, and he's really focusing on the pastured pigs, but he has a lot of other things going on. And the one thing that I really like about Tanner, and this is kind of where we hang out, is talking about his data. As a data geek, I really connected with him on this, that just the benefit of tracking all the things that you can track. And he does a great job of that. And in fact, he's got a little kind of surprise gift for us, and you'll hear it here at the end. And so you can hang in for that, so you'll know what's available there. But without any further ado, let's jump in and get into our conversation with Tanner.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Pastured Pig Podcast. Today, we are getting in the podcast plane, and we're flying all the way down to Hawkins, Texas, to meet with Fuller Farms, who is that farm is run by Tanner Spurlock. Welcome, Tanner.
Thanks, Troy, for having us. Glad to be here.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on. So before we got talking, Tanner was telling me in some of the pre-screening discussion that you guys have had a little bit of high wind today and have been dealing with a little bit of damage from that. I guess that's to be expected in that part of Texas.
Yeah, this time of year, it's just, every week or so you're going to have some kind of wind, or, last week we were dealing with big thunderstorms and tornadoes. This week we're doing with some pretty heavy straight winds, about 60 mile an hour gust. It's just the harsh of this time of year in Texas.
Yeah, my goodness. Sustained 60 mile an hour wind, or even gusts in my neck of the woods, I'd be cutting trees for weeks. Because they would all blow over. All right, well, good. I'm glad you didn't get too severe a damage there. For our listeners, and what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about Fuller Farms here a little bit. We're going to dive right into that, and Tanner's going to give us a background. But what we're going to discuss, and I want to express my appreciation to Tanner for sharing his data. We're going to be a little data heavy today. We're going to talk about Excel spreadsheets, the benefits of using those spreadsheets to manage your data, and the benefits of that, of course, when it comes to your pastured pig operation. So our story arc, our discussion arc is going to flow that direction. So put your seatbelt on. We're going to get a little deeper into topics here. So I know I've had several people request that recently, so this will be very accurate for that. So first of all, Tanner, so people kind of know what's going on, tell me about Fuller Farms. Give me that 40,000 foot elevation view.
Yeah, so in 2017, my wife and I was active duty Navy at the time. We were living up in Washington State. We started getting into backyard homesteading and whatnot. And, to keep a long story short, we ended up raising a market weight hog in our backyard in our residential neighborhood in a playhouse that I converted the bottom into, and we did like a deep bedding system.
Where the neighbors like, that is the ugliest dog I've ever seen.
Surprisingly, none of our neighbors had any idea that we had a pig in the backyard. It didn't smell or anything with the deep bedding system. It didn't make a lot of noise. That is awesome. And nobody realized it until, at the end of that, about 6.5 months, we butchered it in the driveway for all to see. And
those Spurlocks are crazy. They're eating their dog.
Yeah. People were driving by, just kind of giving us the eye and rolling down the windows and asking us what was going on. I was like, oh yeah, you want some? We'll bring you over some for dinner. That is awesome. And so me, I kind of grew up in a family farm atmosphere whenever I was younger. And my wife hadn't. She was very much a city girl. So that pig, the pork chops from that pig was kind of a turning point for her. And she took her first bite and was like, "Hey, I want to do this more." And I'm like, I'm all down for that. So in 2017, we started making our plan that, hey, we're gonna, we're starting our family. We want to get out of the military. We don't want to travel around anymore. Let's go back home to Texas and start a farm. And from the get-go, it was kind of like, hey, we want to do pigs. We want to do things on a regenerative style, rotational pasture kind of ordeal. So we started reading a lot of books and educating ourselves as much as we could, up into the point in 2019 when we got out and moved to East Texas to our 50-acre property. And the week we moved in is the week we got a litter of pigs from one of the homesteader families that we had become friends with on Facebook. We picked up 4 feeders from them and just hit the ground running. And to this point, we're farrow to finish. We have about four sows right now, and we have 2 gilts coming up. We're moving towards Berkshires, coming from a Hereford boar, Berkshire sows, and then we have a couple of like a blue butt sow and a red wattle large black sow that we're kind of starting to phase out. But we're farrow to finish at this point, and now we're starting to go to markets and selling online and shipping across the country and all that with retail cuts. We do more retail cuts now than we do any like wholes or halves, which I've kind of come to like a little bit more.
Yeah, my goodness. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And so let's talk about that briefly. So that in just a handful of years, you've seen this growth, but you've gone, sounds like more into the cut direction. So what was the motivation behind that? Was it just, because obviously with cuts, you have more oversight to worry about, the meat, the storage, all of that type of stuff, client base. You think you raise 12 hogs and you sell them as wholes, you only need 12 customers. Here you're dealing with a lot more. Obviously more markup potential there, but what was the genesis of that? Why did you decide to go that way that quickly?
My time in the Navy really helped as far as a customer base goes, because we started our farm Facebook page and we started marketing, retail cut pork in 2017 whenever we first started it. So all of the, friendships and relationships and people we met while we were traveling around, moving around in the military, and people who, joined on the bandwagon of, hey, the Spurlocks are doing this farming thing. We like that. Let's follow what they're doing. And so that's really benefited us now to the point where I have people all over the country who, military friends are like, hey man, send me some bacon or send me some sausage. So that's just kind of the route we ended up going. We had a litter, and our plan was to sell them all as wholes or halves, and we were working on doing that, but it's a lot harder to ship a whole or a half hog than it is to ship a couple packages of bacon. So,
Right.
So it ended up just kind of falling in the lap, and it was easier for us to go that route than it was to really focus on wholes or halves. Now we still do wholes or halves locally, but we definitely, out of a single litter of 12 to 14 piglets, we'll whole or half. It really won't even do halves. We'll wholesale maybe 1 or 2 of them, and then we'll part out all the others.
Yeah. So how are you managing storage there? Did you guys have a walk-in, just a bank of freezers?
So we built a freezer, and we, managing a slew of chest freezers and whatnot. And, we want to get to where we can just get like maybe a big 40-foot shipping container or something and fill it. But at this point, we're doing a lot of chest freezers and working on building a walk-in freezer. And we're kind of spread out right now to where we don't actually have a lot of inventory on hand at a time. It doesn't stay, in storage for very long, which is, I guess, a good problem to have.
Yeah. I mean, goodness, that has all kinds of benefit to it as well. And I'm, again, we'll get into this in a second, but looking at even your processing schedules, it sounds like you kind of fan those out. That's not just one big processing one point in the year, and then you've got a landfall of inventory, and then over the course of the year, It starts to thin out. You're kind of restocking on a regular basis.
Right. Yeah. Whenever we hit our processing times, whenever we get some litters grown out. We usually do about 3 to 6 pigs a month.
Yeah. Good deal. Yeah, my goodness, there's a whole podcast discussion just in shipping, and I do have that on the list.
Yeah.
So may have to get you back and have you talk about that. There's a couple others we've interviewed that do shipping nationwide, and that opens a whole new market, but also a whole new area of concern and areas you have to keep an eye out for. But we'll stick a pin in that and come back to that at some point later. But so here's the thing, and I think this is kind of teeing up a ball here for you to take a swing at, and based upon the kind of the flow of our discussion. So looking at a new farm, you're starting up, you're really getting into this now. You're also polyculture as well. You're not just pastured pigs, correct?
Right. Yeah, we do pastured poultry, and we have some beef that we run.
Yeah. So looking at that as a new farm, building all of that, building that fast, and then really recognizing, hey, here's an area that we really want to focus. We see a lot of return on investment on this, or we feel that this is where our niche is going to be. The data that backs up that decision is super critical for you, right? And mm-hmm. how did that factor in from day one that you had to start tracking data, or desired to start tracking data to a certain degree?
So it really came as a necessity, because the first few rounds I tracked nothing. And, we would get to the end of it. I would just, be throwing feed out in the fields and not really paying attention to, what we're actually charging. And it would come up to me having to price, a pound of bacon. And I hated doing that, because I would always end up undercutting what it was worth, or what I even paid for it. So I'm by trade, I'm kind of a numbers guy. I'm a IT by trade in the Navy. I was a radioman. And I dealt with satellite communications and networks and stuff for the Navy. And I got out, and I'm a IT manager for a software company in East Texas. So I like data. I can work with computers. I'm fairly computer savvy. So using Excel to build a couple sheets and learning how to track stuff was really just it's easy. It was just kind of at first a tedious task. I had to sit down and start to build. So it started because it was necessary, right? I needed to know how much it cost me to produce one package of bacon, right, so that I could then, figure out, okay, well, if I can produce right now I'm producing a package of bacon for, I believe, like $6.38. Okay. And that's in East Texas. That's using a USDA processor with custom labeling and everything. And that also even includes like transportation, like the gas it would take me to drive to the processor and go pick up the meat and bring it home, and electricity costs for freezers and all that. Wow. Yeah. So if it costs me $6.36 to produce a package of bacon, what is that worth to me to keep doing? Yeah. So then I have to add in my margins on that. So then I have a better idea of what I need to charge someone who asks me for a package of bacon, rather than just, looking at the grocery store and saying, oh, they sell it for $5. If I sold it for $5, I would be losing money every time. So we wouldn't stay in business for very long. So coming up with the data and being able to write up the Excel sheets and reports that we did to be able to track that. And it started with just, a basic expense tracker. Like I started with just hey, I spent something, I sold something, I spent something, I sold something. And I was only paying attention to that bottom number. And then, just playing in the middle of the night and stuff with it, and saying, oh, hey, you know what, I should actually look at this metric and this metric. It just ended up being this whole spreadsheet of different tables that tell us all kinds of information about our pig herds.
Yeah, my goodness, there's so much good stuff there. So for those listening, and I don't want this to sound condescending, but I guess maybe to some degree it is a little bit. The thing that I see constantly, that you're never supposed to use absolutes, right? Never say never use absolutes. But the thing I see a lot on social media, when people are starting to get into pastured pigs, they get into these groups, we have these discussions, you see somebody asking, hey, what are you guys selling your X for? And it could be a whole hog, a half hog, a pack of bacon, whatever. And that question is literally what they're using to base their retail sales off of. Hey, what do you guys sell this for? So,
right.
So Tanner, I know that, again, this is a softball pitch over the plate here, but why is that, in your experience, why is that such a horrible way to approach your business when it comes to pastured pigs? Just saying, hey, what are you guys charging, and I'm going to match that.
Well, I mean, the softball answer to that is what someone on the West Coast is charging is not going to be the same expense cost wise as what someone on the East Coast is going to charge.
Yeah.
So your costs play a huge factor in that. Although I do like that question whenever it does come up, because what I do dislike a lot, and this is on a whole nother topic we can get on in another time, is whenever new producers come in and start asking questions about how to do basic things, and then they get just slapped in the face in the comments about that depends on so many factors. I hate that, because they're just looking for a place to start, because that was me at one point.
Right.
I had posted in farming pages like, hey, what do you do for fencing? And it's like, oh, well, it depends on your soil types and what kind of animals you're running and what you're doing. It's like, I just wanted to know what you're doing and what works for you, so that I can base for myself what would work for me.
Yeah.
So I love and hate that question at the same time, because whenever it comes to cost, it's like, okay, yeah, your input, the answer is always, it depends. It depends on all of your factors that are affecting you in your area. But it's also nice to see, what other people are able to get for a package of bacon or a package of sausage or something versus what maybe you're able to get in your area. I could charge a lot more for bacon if I lived in, if I was closer to Los Angeles than I really can, being in East Texas, because we're such, the economy is so much different.
Yeah. Excellent point. Yeah. And it's one of those things that, as you said, kind of hate that question. And I guess the angle that I'm looking for there, because I think your response was actually even more appropriate than my question, but this idea of, in marketing, there is this element of what the market will bear. So people want to look and say, okay, yeah, I've done a cost analysis, done all this. What can the market bear? Is there an opportunity for more markup, or do I have to be tighter so I can be competitive? But starting with that question to say, what are you guys charging? And then saying, okay, this is where I'm going to set it, and I'm just going to go this part forward and not track cost. To me, that's the big, that's that bear trap there, is say, well, everybody else is charging this, so I'm going to do that. Like you said, you don't want to end up a year down the road and be like, okay, I've sold every single piece of pork that I have, but I'm $6,000 in debt. Why is that? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You don't want to take the answers you get from a question like that and say someone near LA County asked that question and I answer and say I sell a package of bacon for $15 and they're like, okay, let's just use that number, and it cost them $17 to produce it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So for those of you, this is kind of where the podcast format falls a little short. So right now, Tanner has given me his spreadsheet in advance. So I've had some time to pore over this and look at the way he categorizes his costs, some of the metrics he's following, the things he tracks specifically, running total, and he even graciously incorporated live data in this. So he has it in front of him. I have it in front of me. So we're going to be talking through this, and we'll make this as visual as possible. And when we get to the end of the podcast, we'll throw out some other details and things that hopefully it'll help some people out. But that's kind of what's driving this conversation. I'm looking at a spreadsheet here, and these questions pop up in my mind. It's like, oh, I like what you're doing here, I like what you're doing there. Explain this a little bit more. So we're just going to go through this, Tanner and I. So looking at this, Tanner, I'd love to know. So I'm looking at a worksheet here, an Excel spreadsheet that has. Of course, my screensaver just goes to sleep right when I say that. Looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different areas on this worksheet of data that you're tracking. Now, you said the thing when you first got started with this, you were looking at just, income, outgoing, just kind of tracking that, almost like a checkbook type of situation. So,
right.
So you started with that. What other metrics? What were the first thing that popped in your head? It's like, ooh, I ought to start tracking this. This would be helpful to look at.
Right. So, looking at and it does think that the viewers can't see this at the same time, but looking at the spreadsheet, my progression, you can see probably my thought process. It went from the left to the right. So on the left side, that there is the the expense report, right? Just cost income, of what I've spent versus what we've made. And then my next section was, okay, well, this is what our expense versus income is, but I was inputting sales in that report. But I would have to just create long notes about how much I sold a specific thing for. And I wanted a better way to track what I had in inventory, and what I could sell for, could sell a specific thing for, and then also to be able to project. Like, I was almost using this as just like a playground in a sense at first, where I created the table that was my freezer pork inventory. Whenever I take and I break all of these out by litter. So each one of our litters has this whole worksheet to themselves. And this one that I sent you, I don't know if I left it on there or not, but it was litter 12.
Yeah, number 12. Yeah.
So this is litter 12 that you're looking at. In past litters, when I take a pig to the butcher, I'll get their hanging weight, their live weight, and the cost of the processor fees that it cost me to butcher that pig. And I'll put that up in the top of the freezer pork area, and then I'll do an inventory. When I get it back, I'll do an inventory of all the cuts that I got, and I'll input that in the bottom piece, and then I'll give it a price tag. So that was the point. I just wanted to be able to visualize an inventory and what could I get from a pig. So at this point, being 12 litters in, we're able to, I have a good average of, hey, I take this pig to the processor, I'm going to get X amount of bacon, I'm going to get X amount of pork chops and ribs and sausage and so on. So at this point, I just have a metric that I use. It's an average number from what we've been able to get. So right. I can say that, hey, I'm going to get 11 pounds of bacon from my pigs.
Yeah.
So at this point, I can just, at the very top, I can list the number of pigs that I've taken, and the average weight, hanging weight that I expect they're going to be. Because sometimes being able to split up a litter of 12 over a processor over 3 or 4 months, you're going to have a low, medium, and high, right? You're going to take some that are going to, live weight at 220 and hang at 150, and you're going to have some at the end that are going to live weight at 300 and hang it at 200, 215.
Yeah, you got a little bit more.
So,
yeah.
Right. So I usually just go with the middle number. Hey, if I can hit it on the dot every time and take a pig at 250 and they hang at 184, which is really the ideal amount. And that's the number that I base it off of. So
yeah,
in this, I'm able just to, if you can change the number, I can change that top number from 9, which, might be one litter that goes to the process at that time. Or if I want to look at an entire year, I can say 120, and it can change all of my numbers, my metrics for what I'm going to charge per retail cut, and then give me like a total revenue number.
Yeah.
Something and that's really just ballpark, something that I can visualize whenever I'm thinking and planning ahead of what we're going to do.
Yeah. I love this. So some things I want to underscore here. And for those of you listening, again, I don't want to sound condescending in this, but I really want to make sure that the way we're talking about this, that we know that there's some people listening that are just getting started. So some of you guys may be like, well, yeah, no kidding. That's, everybody knows that. But we want to make sure we're starting at the ground here. So Tanner has his cost analysis, or his basic ledger, almost like a checkbook ledger. But in this situation, because he's taken the time to accumulate this data, this is more than just, hey, this is what it costs at the feed store, I'm putting that cost in, and here's the amount of money I made when I sold a pig, and that just is 2 line items. The fact that he takes the time when his product comes back, so he's got X amount of bacon, he counts packages, he weighs packages, or the packages have the weights on them, I assume. So taking that time to put all that data in, it's as most people know, you've heard this term, garbage in, garbage out. Your data is only as good as what you put in. But if you take the time, and I know I can definitely speak to this from experience, when you get all of your pork in at one point, you just want to get it in the freezer, you just want to get it in the customer's hands. He's like, man, I don't want to take the time to do all this. But if you do, it pays dividends. And the reason why, and as Tanner just said, he can simply put in a litter number. So if I've got 9 pigs I'm going to finish, and I know because of data shows that their average hanging weight is going to be X, He's just putting those two numbers in the spreadsheet and bang, bang, bang. I'm looking at this list. Smoked bacon, smoked jowl bacon, pork chops, smoked sausage links, smoked sausage patties, pork tenderloins, smoked ham, pork ribs, smoked bacon ends. He knows roughly the quantities he's going to get. He has his retail price for it, and then it immediately does a forecasting. So, and Tanner already told me in advance he's fine with me throwing this out. So looking at litter number 12, which is active litter right now, he's already forecasting a gross sales of $11,800. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. So I just, and that's not a number that he just, poofed out of the air, just made up. It's like, wow, wouldn't it be great if I could make almost 12 grand? This is backed by 11 litters prior to litter 12 worth of data, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I think is so fantastic, that if we all challenge ourselves to take the time to accumulate this data, understand how to put it in a system like this, whether it's Excel or Google Sheets or whatever the case may be, then being able to use that data in the future for forecasting, for understanding this. I'm sure when you look at growth of your farm, Tanner, this plays such a huge part in saying, do I add those two gilts or do I not add those two gilts?
Right. Yeah. And that is a big factor for, deciding our growth. We've hit a point last year where it's like we kind of had to decide to grow or stay, where we're just doing a little bit at a time, which is inherently hard, especially whenever you're doing cuts, because if you only are able, and we have a couple grocery stores here that we sell in too, if I can only supply bacon in a store to customers for a couple months out of the year, I have to fight for that customer every single year.
Right.
Or every single time I get a new product, unless you can become, just, hey, that's the steady of, hey, I get my bacon from Fuller Farms every week, and just a year-round thing. I just get my bacon from Fuller Farms. That's just where I go. So last year we hit that, and having these metrics was a big decision factor in that, and deciding that retail cuts was the way that we were going to go rather than wholes. Was by having this data and being able to really forecast what everything is. And whenever you hit times like this year, whenever price increases skyrocket, obviously your data is going to change, but that's why we take the same data over every litter at as many inputs as we can put into the data we do, so that we can, over 10 years, we can have that 10-year average of what it looks like. So, that's why we've added pastured poultry to the operation. That's why we cut back on our beef operation, because our numbers for beef don't look that great, because there's a lot of beef producers in East Texas. So, we don't do that much beef where originally we were going to do a lot of grass-fed beef. So we don't anymore. We only butcher maybe 1 or 2 steers a year. Really is just an add-on to customers who were already ordering through us, just to give them the option.
Yeah. So wait a minute. So you're saying you didn't add pastured poultry just because you like chicken and it just seemed like the thing to do?
Oh, absolutely not.
Right.
Yeah. Although we do love pastured poultry, and it does seem like the right thing to do. Right. The numbers back it up. Exactly.
And you said something there that I think is super critical, especially in this time that we're in right now. So let's talk a little bit about your feed tracker chart here. So this idea of looking at your costs, and instead of just throwing your costs in a big bucket to say, hey, here's my feed, here's infrastructure repair, all that type of stuff, and just having this out-of-pocket expense at the end of this litter. Explain to our listeners a little bit about what you're doing with feed tracking and what key data you're able to pull from that.
Yeah, so in our feed tracker, that stemmed from in previous litters at the beginning, me just throwing a bunch of feed out, and really at the end, not even knowing how much feed I gave them. At one point we were feeding in 50-pound bags, and I would go buy 10 or 20 bags from the feed store every week or two, and I would just throw bags out there, and I wasn't really considering waste. I wasn't considering how much feed the pigs were actually consuming, how much that really cost me. So what I wanted to do was break it down in a matter of, it started with, okay, well, whenever I feed the pigs, I'm just going to mark the date, and I'm going to mark how much I fed them, because we free feed our feeders. We do not free feed our breeding pair, and that's a whole different metric on how I track their feeding. It's more generalized with them just because they're revolving. They're there every year. But for our feeders, we free feed them in bulk hoppers. I have a couple. I have a 1,000-pound feed hopper. I have a 360-pound feed hopper. So every time I feed them, go out and unload a bunch of feed buckets into the hopper, I just track the date and how much feed I gave them. So one, I can see how long that feed is lasting them, because that's also how we judge our movements of the herds across our pastures. So in that feed tracker, at the bottom, after we get past how much feed we're giving them and the date we're giving them, it breaks it down to how much total feed per pound that the herd is getting. And then it's divided down to how much feed, and it all becomes averages at this point, because I can't say exactly which pig ate the most or ate the least.
Sure.
Or what the waste was. But I break it down to how much average of how much feed we've given is each pig getting. So how much feed are we giving total per pig? And then I break it down into the days. So I take a maximum, minimum, average, or a number of the days that are in the list, and say, okay, we get as far down as how much feed is each pig eating per day, and how much is that costing me per day? Because I have I can track the cost per pound of feed. We buy feed in bulk now, which, if any of you listeners don't buy your feed in bulk from your local mill, please reconsider, because for a 50-pound bag of feed at the feed store, you're likely paying around 21 to 25 cents per pound for a 50-pound bag. Whereas if you can get it in bulk in tote bags from your local feed mill, in our area at least, we're paying 22 cents or 23 cents per pound, and that's on 100 weight. So sorry, I misspoke. If you're getting in 50-pound bags, you're likely paying around 40 cents per pound, whereas we're paying around 23 to 24 cents per pound buying in bulk. So something to consider if you're not doing that. So in that sense, I'm able to track, okay, how much feed per day is each pig eating, and how much is that pig costing me per day in feed.
Yeah.
And then that tracks down to how much, over that average, if we keep a pig for 200 days, how much is that pig costing me, which, I have a metric. I try to keep that around $180 or less.
Yeah.
Which is our goal. So
yeah, which is awesome, because so using that and dropping some live data, because I know people are listening probably think, well, let's hear some numbers. So looking at this litter 12, which is right now, obviously this litter's not done yet, right? Obviously you've got this litter was born mid-December, December 15th to be exact. I start tracking metrics around 4 to 6 weeks. We wean at 6 weeks, so I don't really track a whole lot of feed input in the beginning, because mom is eating a lot of that, and I track her separately. So we started tracking this litter around January 15th. And our first 3 from this herd is going to the butcher on June 9th. Yeah. So we're about midway through right now. Yeah. So looking at that, data you've put in the spreadsheet up until about the 18th of March, because I know when people listen to this, it's going to be later. But so the 18th of March, looking at your data, you're about 2,800 pounds of feed in. Your total pounds per pig is currently 258 pounds. Feed cost per pig, you're looking at right now running around $64, 76 days fed. And this is what's neat, getting all the way down to this detail. So pounds per pig per day, so 3.4 pounds per pig. That's another question I hear all the time. How much feed should I be giving my pig daily? Mm-hmm. What you're talking about is free choice. So that's not necessarily a rationing thing, but that's what helps people think, well, Tanner's getting this type of production, he's getting this type of finish weight, and he's giving on average pigs 3.4 pounds.
That number actually helps us track how our pastures are doing too. Because we cover crop, we spread cover crop over the we give each herd about an acre, 3/4 to an acre worth of paddock each time. We move them every couple of weeks. So that actually, and then we seed it with cover crop afterwards. So as the herds are coming through, depending on how much feed they're consuming per day tells me how much forage they're being able to get from the pasture.
So you're actually using this as live data. So it's data on the fly. So you're coming in and saying, "Ooh, my feed consumption per day is up a little bit. This ground cover may not be good, or there's something with the paddock that's a little funky, or it's just time to move on." Is that correct?
Correct. And the further tables we get over will actually reference this data into our pasture rotations as well to tell us that.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we'll get to that here in a sec, because there's one other thing that I want to really pinpoint, especially with where we are right now. So those of you thinking about this, so not only is Tanner using this for real-time data that's going to get into more on what we talk about here for pasture assessment, but just imagine right now. So I know my feed store locally, we've seen an increase in the past year of about 60% in feed costs. So if I decide, okay, if I'm going to have a litter soon, it's like, how many do I decide to sell off as wean pigs for somebody else, or how many am I going to finish? Like, well, feed costs have gone up. Is it going? How's this really going to pencil out? If you don't have that data, you're really just going to be throwing darts. You can get some sort of idea, but you're not going to have this data. But what you have here, you can literally drop in that new feed cost and then forecast and say, okay, the last 11 litters, this is what I've had. So you get a really good idea. Wow, that just bumped my cost up above my threshold. So that means my sale price needs to increase by this percentage. And it just becomes a domino game, right? I mean, one thing changes. So without sitting down and taking a whole week to figure out where you need to be, or just putting on a blindfold and throwing a dart, you're dropping a number in a spreadsheet, and then you can see real quickly, oh, this is what I need to do to adjust.
Right. And we do the same thing with our transportation cost and breaking it down to how much does it cost me to drive a mile to the, between like the processor to go to the grocery store. So going back to the left, I have a metric box that breaks out our different categories of cost for the pig. So transportation is one of those, and I think we value it at around 12 cents a pound per pig. So overall, I've broken that down to basically what I did was take the and I have this in a separate sheet that's not in this list that you have, but for my truck, right, I drive a Dodge Ram 2500 diesel. So I take my miles per gallon that I get on average, and break that down by the miles it takes me round trip to get to the processor and back, and the current gas price.
Yeah.
So, as gas prices changes, I can see if that is going to break my threshold for what I charge in transportation per pig.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, perfect example. So right here in West Virginia, currently at the time of recording this, we're $5 a gallon for diesel.
Ouch.
So where are you right now in Texas?
There was some places that almost hit $5 here in East Texas, but we're back down to about $4. Now, on a typical, the years past, we've been at, $2.30 or so. So this is, it's really spiked up for everyone in the last couple of days. We're about $4.30 right now.
You gotta love Texas. So perfect example. So the increase over the course of, and for some of us, that increase in the last 12 months could literally be the difference of 1 liter to the next. So your transportation costs and fuel just doubled. Now, you factor in, I don't know, how much tractor activity you have and that type of stuff, but in my situation, tractor, side by side, all of those things that are that help me with daily chores with the pigs, all of that stuff goes up. And if you just say, well, I'm gonna bump up cost of bacon a quarter, I think that'll cover it. You can do that, but you're just spitballing to have some of these things in place. You can really get an idea of just how much that affects your overall profit margin.
Right. And plus, we don't want to charge, unreasonable prices for retail cuts. We want to keep it not, nowhere near commodity, obviously, but at least in a reasonable level for people in our area and people that would buy from us to be reasonable. So, I don't want to just say, oh, I'll just bump it up a quarter whenever I could just say, okay, well, let's increase it X amount, an exact 12 cents or, 3 cents just to be able to cover that cost, because I can make my profit right. I have a metric to decide what I make in my profit that doesn't include, what we pay in transportation. So
yeah,
it's an important factor too.
Well, and it's one of those things too. I call it, as I get older, I realize there's just this life amnesia. So you could think if you're just knee jerking this stuff and say, well, I'm going to bump it up a quarter and cover that. Again, that may be fine. Come out in the wash. You don't lose any customers, and maybe didn't even lose money in that situation. But 2, 3, 4 years down the road, you're going to look back and say, why did I raise this price a quarter? Or what was my motivation for that? And if there's no data, there's nothing there, then you're just going to have this abyss that you're just going to keep playing in, and then realize that, well, I wish I would have known this, or I wish I would have written this down. And with that being said, this is what I like about your spreadsheet too. So your spreadsheet isn't just pure numbers when it comes to feed pounds and dollar amounts. You also have these sections with milestones. Tell us a little bit about milestones.
Yeah, I like to track the milestones just so I can, for myself, know when major things are going to happen, and then I use it for planning. Because we get busy and dates creep up on us and we forget when things happen. So I like to track whenever I know the sow has been bred. I don't believe it's in this metric. I think I missed it for 12. But so I'll track whenever the litter is born, whenever they're farrowed, whenever I plan to wean them, how long they're going to be in our education pen that we like to call it, because they're weaning and learning electric.
Yeah.
And then after that, whenever I'm going to move, whenever I plan on doing pasture rotations, and I can plan almost down to the day based on the next table we'll talk about, when they're going to be moved based on the ground disturbance and the feed. Yeah. And then whenever we're going to have butcher days, because we need to keep those aware whenever they're coming up, so we can make sure we, are keeping our eye out for the best pigs to take at the time.
Yeah, which is awesome, because looking at this, so for those of you listening, looking at Tanner's general ledger he has here, he even uses colors appropriately. So he's got milestones even in his general ledger. So 12, 15, 20, 21 milestone, 13 piglets born, and then bang, here goes the cost associated with that. And then you see, okay, here's the wean date, here's the date you put pigs out on pasture, which again is really interesting. I don't know how much seasonal change. I assume you still have North Texas. You still have a little bit of dormancy that comes into play there. So looking at, okay, pigs on pasture in February versus pigs in pasture in March or May or June. There's other things that affect that, and knowing the date that you went out on pasture helps you look at feed consumption and the way your pasture's handling all that. Right.
Yeah. If we move on to the next table that talks about our paddocks and our rotations.
Yeah.
So we have it listed out, and doing a lot of study of Joel Salatin, and the way that he's moved pigs kind of prompted me to come up with the formula that we use, which is number of pigs in the herd times a specific number, which currently we're using 0.004, and that number is specifically how much feed in pounds we're giving per square foot per pig.
Okay.
So that number then times the square footage of the area that we've given them, because that changes from paddock to paddock. Gives us the amount of feed that they need to consume before we move them to reach an appropriate amount of ground disturbance, and gives us a good planning tool for rotations. So, and that 0.004 number, we've adjusted that back and forth over time. We'll adjust it in different seasons, up or down a digit, maybe even a half mark. That really gets granular, because that's just how many pounds of feed I'm going to feed per square footage that I'm giving them per pig. So we've used 0.0035, 38, 4, and maybe 4.5. That just kind of moves up and down just to adjust how much feed that we're gonna provide them before we do move them. And we just pay attention every time we run a litter over the ground to watch the ground disturbance. And at this point, we've gotten it down to kind of a key that whenever we hit that day that they're supposed, or the poundage that they're supposed to have consumed on that piece of that area that we've given them, and we have pretty good even ground disturbance, and nothing has gotten too packed. Areas around the feeders still get kind of packed down, and unless you're going out there and moving the feeder where the feeder physically is sitting, like every day, I think you kind of can't avoid getting some compaction around those areas, which we've just factored in as an okay level of risk to take. So that's how we base our rotation. So I think our first paddock for this one, we gave, you might have to give me the number because I'm not looking at it.
Okay. Yeah. So your first entry is WP, which I assume is your weaning pasture.
That is our weaning pen. So the weaning pen is unique because it doesn't follow our rule, because we leave the pigs in the weaning pen for about 2 weeks.
Right. Yeah.
And that's from 6 to 8 weeks, where we put them in to wean them, and then we train them to electric wire, because we run all of our pigs on the property on one strand of electric wire and step-in post.
Yeah, good. So looking at that, it's disturbance is what disturbance is, because the key factor in that is they need to be 2 weeks to not only for the sows to dry up, but obviously for them to get experience on electric. So that's the main metric there. Okay, so then when they're weaned, it's time to roll them out into P1, paddock 1 or pasture 1, which looking at your data here is 0.7 acres or 30,534 square feet. And you've got 11 pigs on there. And the reason why he went from 13 to 11, just in case people are wondering, he sold two weaners, which is actually in his general ledger. So he sold 2 feeder pigs. So obviously that makes the number change. So 11 pigs go out on pasture 1, and looking at 1,343 pounds of feed in that. So that is that is a number that you're putting in that this is where your equation's coming in.
Yeah, this is the equation. So this is saying the square footage of that paddock times 0.004 is the number we're using for this round, times the number of pigs gives us that 13,000 something pounds of feed that need to be consumed in that area before they move on to the next pasture number 2.
Yeah, and that's I assume that's 1,300, not 13,000.
Yeah, 1,300.
Okay,
sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
And then the next column there is really just for me. For this one, we're using a 360 pound feed hopper. So I have that number just broken down to how many times do I need to fill up that feed hopper before I move them, which for this time in pasture number 1 was about 4 times.
Yeah. So that even helps you kind of forecast your labor. It's like, okay, I've got to, and I don't know what you use to fill your hopper, but maybe that's, a tractor. You've got your bulk bags. You're going out there and doing that. So, okay, in this time frame on this pasture, I'm going to have to do that task 4 times.
Right. Yeah. And just granular for us, I have a feed wagon that we're trying to repair. It's broken. We bought it second, probably 5th or 6th hand. I got to fix the auger on it, but right now we're just using 5-gallon buckets and throwing them in the back of the side-by-side of the truck. So I can fit 30 pounds of feed in a 5-gallon bucket. So I just know that it takes me 12 buckets to hit 360 pounds. I load that up from the feed barn, put it in the back of the truck, drive out there and unload it into the feed hopper. At the same time, I'm moving our field feeder. So it's a 3 foot by 8 foot skid made out of 4x4s that has a 275 IBC tote for a water with pig nipples coming off of it. And then our 360 pound feed hopper. And then, so I'm moving that every time that I fill it up, so that I don't get, crazy compaction in one area, and it kind of promotes, we're giving pigs a large area. So, and as they're smaller at this point, they're 2 months old. I gotta convince them to spread out over the entire 7/10 of an acre that we gave them this time. So I move it into a different quadrant of that paddock each time I fill it up. We fill it up 4 times, and after that time, then I open up a gate and pull it through. And by that time, they just know to come follow the truck and the field feeder, because he's about to fill it up.
Awesome. So let me ask you this and make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So the last column in this chart is days on pasture. So for pasture 1, that number is 23. So is that number is calculated? Are you using that number almost like it's the result of an odometer of the feed that you're feeding out? So when we get to this point, okay, I know it's time to move, and that happens to be on day 23, or in advance it's going to be day 23 because of what I'm seeing forecast wise.
Yeah, so that number is actually in the table is generated by the date column, the very first date column, and it's just minusing the one below it. So that data is only coming from there. It's only telling you the number of days between the first day they were on that pasture and the day I moved them. But I do reference that number. So whenever I move them to a new pasture, I take my average of my pounds pounds of feed per day per pig, and I divide that by the total amount of feed that they need to get for the next pasture, because I'll have that calculated out. Pasture 2 is, I think just under an acre. Maybe it's around 38 to 40.
Yeah, it says 40.
200 square foot.
Yeah, a little over.
40,000 square foot. So I've already calculated that number before I've ever moved them. So I know how much feed they're going to take. So I just divide that by the average of what they're eating at that point. And it'll grow a little bit. We might lose a day or two as we're going through. Because they're gonna consume more as they get bigger.
Yeah.
But it does just help me forecast what day I need to plan on having the next pasture the paddock line up, because we don't have any hard fencing other than our main property exterior fence. So I do have to go out and set up a new paddock whenever they get ready to move forward. So it just gives me a good planning day to know that, hey, I'm in about 23 days. I'll go and look on the calendar to see what day that is and mark it, in my milestones on what day that's projected to be, and I'll just know that, hey, around that time a week before or something, I need to go start getting ready.
Yeah. So in this example, with this live data we're looking at the point of recording this, it's the end of March. So 3/11. So earlier this month, you moved over into pasture 2, and you're showing that on April the 15th will be time to move over into pasture 3, which means you should have fed out about 1,762 pounds in pasture 2, correct? Yeah.
Correct. And I sent you this, but before I put in my new data, obviously sent it to you last week or something. So at this point, we've filled up that hopper 3 times. So they're expecting one more hopper fill up to hit that 1,700 pounds, and then they'll finish once they finish that, which will take them about between 4 and 7 days to finish it, and we'll move them.
Yeah. And you're processing it, like you said, you're going to start processing some in June. So the number of pigs I see here actually starts decreasing.
Will drop.
Yeah. Very cool. That's slick. So, goodness. So looking at this with that rotation schedule, so that not only tells you how to forecast your feed, obviously when you're going to obviously see cash realized because it's time to process, but this is really helping you not only with your calendar schedule. So what's this week look like for me? Oh, okay, I've got to move, I've got to do this, but also just the overall maintenance of your farm, like you say, pasture integrity in that situation, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Well, it helps us project whenever we need to have cover crop seed on hand to be able to spread. Tells us whenever we're going to have to get things put up, fence line put up, whenever we're going to need to be able to move. It tells us what kind of things that we need to have prepared and orchestrated in order to occur on, X day.
Yeah. Excellent. So,
and then we have these same metrics set up for our cows and for our poultry flock. So it really helps us plan out, weeks in advance what we're going to need to be prepared to do.
Yeah. And my goodness, I can definitely echo that, because with poultry, the data that I keep on poultry is almost, it's kind of ridiculous, simply because you're looking at an 8-week window versus, pig's going to be 6 to 9 months, whatever the case may be. Beef could be as much as 2 years. So with something that has an entire turnover cycle of just 8 weeks, having that data be as fresh as possible is very critical, because you could overlook something, or you say, well, I'm going to take a week off of putting all this information in, and you could end up missing out. I mean, that's 1/8 of your entire life cycle of your product if you decide to skip a week on recording data. So this really helps you with your time management, as well as your income stream, and of course your farm maintenance as well. Well, let me ask you this question. So everything I'm looking at here is based upon this litter. So we know you have multiple sows. You're bringing gilts on farm. So are you doing this separately? So there's a pasture 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 for litter 12, and then litter 13 is going to be in pasture 6, 7, 8, 9. How do you manage that on the farm?
So how we have a couple different areas that, we'll take 5 acres and say, hey, that's going to be where, litter 13, 14 will be. But then eventually we try to break it up every 6 months so that, maybe litter 13 is not on the same ground, but litter 14 will be started over on the same ground. And that, we split the farm up by saying our north pasture or our wood lot. We have a 5-acre wood lot. Our back pasture, our north pasture. So I don't necessarily keep the metric in there to separate them. I just kind of know based on what litter it is. But at least I don't. Maybe that answers your question.
Yeah. But at least this, and that was just kind of the key there. So this spreadsheet is not one of the things. I just want to make sure the listeners aren't thinking, okay, yeah, he tracks all of that, but if he's got litter 12 and 13 and 14 in the same pasture, how is he keeping all that separate? These do move as individual units. So litter 12.
Oh yeah, yeah. So this workbook is completely solidified to litter 12. Yeah. I don't mix our litters. I keep separate herds for the breeders and for all of the feeders. Just because they're, we try to run them. We try to farrow on like a quarterly basis. So I don't really like mixing different aged pigs. I just like to keep them separate. That way I can keep all of the data contained to themselves. And in that sense, I can compare how a litter did in one section of the farm versus another section of the farm, or even between different breeds.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, man, that's great. And I want to be sensitive to your time. I'm looking at our ticker here. We're creeping up on an hour already. And I wanted to give you an opportunity because in my mind, what I'm looking at here in front of me is much, much easier to digest than those people, out doing farm chores, listening to us talk, or driving down the road, listening to us talk, and they don't have these visuals. So let's start here. What would you recommend in your experience with your background for somebody who's like, man, I don't know anything about Excel. I don't know anything about Google Sheets. I don't even really know where to start there. How does somebody get started, and what would you say is the bare minimum tracking you should do? So experience, how do I, in education, how do I figure out how to use this type of this software? And B, what should I start tracking immediately? What's the bare minimum?
Well, I think, really Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets or whatever you want to use are, pretty much the bare bones basic and data management that you could learn. So if you could just learn, Excel or, just basic things in Google Sheets, just have somewhere where you can input data on a item and description level, learn that. And then the bare bones minimum that you need to be tracking is expense and income. You have to start somewhere. So start with what you're spending at the feed store and what you're selling your pigs for.
Yeah.
The rest can come. You can start diddling and figuring out different things different metrics that you want to track. All of this came from just things that I decided that, hey, that would be an interesting thing to know, or that would be maybe a key point indicator of something of some kind of metric that we might want to know about our herds. You can come up with all of those, and Google's our friend, right, figuring out how to make those happen.
Yeah.
But bare bones tracking what you're spending and what you're bringing in is, I can't stress how important that would be for any producer to want to succeed.
Awesome. Very good. Yeah, I echo what you say there. It's, obviously Excel, there's expense associated with that. Google is free. So if you have access to Excel, fine. If you don't, just start a Google account and you get Sheets, Docs, all those things for free, and you can use it. And mm-hmm. they're pretty similar. I mean, Sheets is going to allow you to do what you need to do. But the neat thing about the world we live in today, if you want to figure out how to use either piece of those software, go to YouTube. There's tons of videos out there that will teach you step by step on how to use the basics of these spreadsheets. And like Tanner said, these are actually the most basic. When you get into income management software and all those things, or you start running QuickBooks and all that, then obviously it gets a little more complicated. But this is going to give you the bare bones to get started. And as he mentioned, the general ledger stuff, what's coming in, what's going out. And then the thing I've discovered, and I think this is what you're saying as well too, Tanner, is when you start finding the questions you're asking yourself. Hey, why did this cost this much? Or why does it seem like I don't have this? Or why does it seem like this litter is lighter or heavier, or my ground's torn up a little bit more? When you start asking yourself these questions, then that should be the trigger to say, well, that's what I need to start tracking. I need to figure out how much feed cost going up affected me, or why I ended up feeding out more feed this year than last year, that type of thing. So those are the questions when you start asking yourself, then you realize that's what I got to do to track. And then it's up to you to figure out exactly, okay, what's that data we need to be tracking down.
Right.
Well, cool. Well, one thing that Tanner shared with me before we got on the recording here, and I really appreciate his graciousness. He is making this spreadsheet available to me to share with our Patreon supporters. So we're going to take this spreadsheet, we're going to post it on our Patreon, so any supporters at any level of Patreon can use this and be able to look at it, and of course even field some questions. I would assume, Tanner, you're okay with us putting your contact information. If some of our Patreon supporters have a question, they could reach out to you.
Absolutely.
Like I put him on the spot here while we're recording this. So,
yeah.
So want to make that available to you guys, and I really appreciate Tanner doing that. You can kind of tell Tanner has a business head about him, so he's a supporter of the podcast, which I really appreciate. Appreciate everyone that supports that, but sees the value and value-added services for those who do choose to support. So we're going to make this spreadsheet available for you guys. You can find the link when you go to your Patreon account. You'll find it as a post, so you can be able to access that and just kind of peruse this data there. I think it'd be very handy for you to go through and look at if you have questions or you're thinking about kind of ramping up your data capture game. Well, Tanner, before we wrap up, I can't not do a podcast without asking the proverbial question. So, other than data, what do you love most about raising pigs on pasture?
I love just, honestly, I could sit out with the pigs all day long and not do anything else. Just, sit in the grass and let them play with me. My favorite thing though is I have 3 daughters, and my oldest is 3. And taking her out onto the farm with me, and she loves to go get into the she calls them the baby big pen. No matter how big they are, they're the baby pigs. Right. She loves getting into the pigs with them, and just we raise a really docile herd of pigs. So her being 3 years old can walk right up and they'll come and sniff on her, and she loves just being out there and play with them. And my favorite thing about raising pastured pigs is being able to pass that on and seeing my daughter out there learning how Mother Nature works.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, it's good stuff. I love the whole generational aspect of that. So very good. So if people want to find out more about Fuller Farms, how can they find you?
Yeah, you can find us, our website, fullerfarmstx.com. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at Fuller Farms Texas, Fuller Farms TX. We also have a YouTube channel that's pretty outdated, that kind of went along with some of our really early beginnings of getting moved out to the farm, and I update it with a pig update every now and then. I did a little video on the field feeder that we built.
Yeah. Cool.
But yeah, our website or Facebook and Instagram are the main ways.
Wonderful. Well, we'll put all that information down below in the show notes so you guys can check that out. Well, Tanner, man, I really appreciate you taking the time to not only talk with us, but also to sharing this data and being that transparent. I really appreciate it.
Well, all right. Well, I really appreciate Tanner taking the time to dive deep into his data and actually be using live numbers there. Appreciate that transparency. And I really appreciate him allowing me to take that spreadsheet and put it out on the Patreon site, so you guys that support the podcast can take that and check it out and go through it. And you can even use that as a template if you want to start your own tracking in that same way. So I appreciate that. And again, if some of you guys listen and say, oh, I really would like to have access to that, that's kind of a bait and switch. Well, I guess maybe it is to some degree, but I think the podcast still has relevancy if you don't have the data right in front of you. And again, Tanner's a supporter. He's a Patreon supporter, and I appreciate his support. So he's helping us just continue to grow this. So for as little as $5 a month, you can be a Patreon supporter. So if you've been on the fence about that, then maybe this will help you make that decision. Information's down below in the show notes, so be sure to check that out if you want to find out more information about the podcast or about Tanner and anything else we've got going on. Well, again, reach out to me if you want to be a guinea pig or you want to be scheduled for for an actual episode, then we can get that scheduled as well. All right, I pray everyone have a great week. Take care.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of the Pastured Pig Podcast. To learn more about our podcast or to submit topics or recommend guests for future episodes, visit redtoolhouse.com.